The dawn was still yawning over Solstice Air's main terminal, casting muted rays through the vaulted skylights as the building hummed awake. Towering beams stretched toward the ceiling like ribs of a metallic cathedral, framing the space where executives, employees, and travelers intersected in a rhythm of departure and arrival. At the heart of it all walked Dr. Ava Sinclair, her tailored charcoal gray suit crisp, her stride purposeful, and her presence impossible to ignore. Ava wasn't just any executive. She was the co-founder of Solstice Air, the first black woman to spearhead a national airline in over half a century, and one of the few in the world to hold an equal ownership stake. She had started as an aerospace engineer, made waves in sustainability tech, and risen through the maze of industry politics to build something that truly belonged to her. Today marked a milestone. Solstice was launching its first direct transatlantic route from Atlanta to Lisbon, a project Ava had conceptualized, lobbied for, and led from sketch to runway. As she entered the conference room for the final briefing before the inaugural flight, the space quieted with the soft murmur of anticipation. The room, lined with aircraft models and award plaques, now buzzed with board members, legal advisors, and public relations executives. Ava's closest partner in the venture, interim CEO Diego Martins, stood by the projector, giving her a nod of respect before beginning the presentation. She took her seat at the head of the table, her mind partly in the room and partly envisioning the Lisbon skyline awaiting them later that evening. The flight wasn't just symbolic, it was deeply personal. Her late mentor, Professor Elias Monroe, used to tell her that borders were never barriers, only challenges. He believed travel could rewrite the narrative of who belonged where. Solstice Air was her chance to make that belief a reality. Diego clicked through slides outlining operational updates, but when it was Ava's turn, the room seemed to lean in. She stood, voice steady and thoughtful, mapping the business case for underserved routes that linked diaspora communities across oceans. She talked of representation not only in staffing but in routes, partnerships, and policy. Her proposal didn't just forecast profit, it promised legacy. By the end, the executives around her were nodding in consensus. The vote passed unanimously. Applause followed, restrained but sincere. Ava returned to her office feeling both victorious and vulnerable. Success, especially for someone like her, always carried the added weight of representation. One slip, one misstep, and it wasn't just Ava who'd be questioned, it was every woman who looked like her. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Leona, her executive assistant, stepped in with a smile. "Your itinerary for tonight, Dr. Sinclair," she said, placing a neatly folded folder on the desk. "And a reminder, dinner with the Portuguese delegation is at 8 p.m. sharp." "Thanks, Leona," Ava said, opening the folder. "First class boarding pass, seat 2A. Terminal 4. Standard perks for a founder," but something in her chest fluttered uneasily. After Leona left, Ava called her husband, Raymond, a professor of constitutional law with an impossibly calm voice that always managed to ease her nerves. "Guess who's officially flying across the Atlantic with a full cabin and a full heart?" she teased. "Professor Sinclair, I'd wager," he answered, matching her tone. Saving aviation one policy at a time. They spoke for 10 minutes, long enough to talk about the dog's latest mischief, their daughter's science fair project, and the anniversary dinner planned for next week. But before hanging up, Ava paused. "You know, I feel like I should be more excited. Something feels off. Maybe I'm just tired." "You're allowed to feel that," Raymond replied. "But don't forget, you're walking into history. Just make sure the world sees it." She hung up with a smile, but his words echoed louder than the hum of the air vent. History didn't always greet its makers with applause. Sometimes, it waited in silence to be challenged. Across the terminal, behind a sleek check-in counter under Terminal 4's first-class sign, stood Maddie Lorne. Once hailed as one of Solstice Air's most detail-oriented check-in supervisors, Maddie now found herself fraying at the seams. Her once meticulous posture had sagged under the pressure of personal chaos, an ugly custody battle, ballooning medical bills, and a teenage son who refused to speak unless it involved Wi-Fi passwords. Earlier that morning, Maddie had been called into the supervisor's office and given a not-so-subtle warning. Her numbers were slipping. Complaints were up. "We know it's been hard, but professionalism can't suffer," her manager had said with forced compassion. Maddie had nodded mutely, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. Now she stood at the counter, her hair pulled too tightly into a bun, scanning passengers with a brittle expression. Most came and went without issue. But as the day progressed, her patience began to unravel thread by thread. When Ava Sinclair stepped up to her counter that evening, rolling a sleek carry-on behind her and offering a quiet, "Good evening, Maddie felt it, something in her shifted. This woman had that look, unshaken, polished, fully in control. She didn't ask for permission, she expected efficiency. Ava handed over her boarding pass and ID, her demeanor warm but composed. Maddie stared at the documents, her eyes narrowing. The name matched. The seat matched. But something irrational flared in her chest. Resentment? Envy? It didn't matter. "This doesn't seem right," she muttered. "Excuse me?" Ava asked, still smiling, but her brows pinched slightly. "I'll need to verify your credentials," Maddie said, typing into the system without looking up. "There shouldn't be any issue," Ava said, still calm. But Maddie wasn't listening. She tapped harder, ignoring the blinking confirmation on her screen that clearly validated Ava's identity and status. Instead, she fixated on the image of this poised woman who seemed to have everything Maddie had lost: confidence, clarity, control. "I'm going to call for a secondary check," Maddie said flatly, reaching for the internal line. Passengers behind Ava began to shift and murmur. Some watched. One even began filming. Ava sighed, her hands folded calmly over her passport. "I'd appreciate it if you'd explain what you're looking for." "I'm not aware of any flags." "I said I need to verify," Maddie snapped. It was then that Ava's smile disappeared. She met Maddie's eyes, no anger, no panic. Just a piercing steadiness. "Do what you have to. I'm not going anywhere." As Maddie dialed security, her fingers trembled just slightly. Somewhere deep down, a voice questioned her actions. But louder than that was the need to reassert control in a life where she had none. And just like that, a storm was beginning to gather over Gate 4. The air in Terminal 4 thickened with tension. Whispers rippled through the line as passengers shuffled their feet and peeked over one another's shoulders, drawn by the unfolding scene like moths to a slow-burning flame. The elegant woman standing her ground at the counter didn't raise her voice, didn't gesticulate, didn't demand attention, yet she commanded it. Ava Sinclair remained perfectly still, her passport closed and resting calmly on the counter like a silent protest. Her eyes didn't blink as she watched Maddie Lauren speak quietly into the phone, her voice clipped and sterile. "Yes, Terminal 4 check-in. First class. Passenger needs identity verification." "Yes. Immediately." Ava glanced at the small digital screen in front of her. Her name and reservation details shown in bold green, confirmed, priority access. She already knew what it said, but reading it again only solidified the absurdity of the moment. Behind her, a man in a tailored jacket muttered, "She's obviously not causing trouble. What's this about?" Another woman, a nurse judging by the ID badge swinging from her lanyard, leaned toward him and whispered, "She's probably just being thorough." But even she sounded unconvinced. Maddie hung up the phone and folded her arms tightly. "Security will be here shortly," she announced, not meeting Ava's gaze. Her eyes darted to the growing crowd instead, discomfort flickering in her features like static. Ava took a deep breath and stepped slightly to the side, facing the murmuring passengers. Her voice rang out, clear, even, and controlled. "There seems to be some confusion about my legitimacy as a passenger. I'd like to reassure everyone, my identification is accurate, and my seat was assigned by this airline, which, incidentally, I helped co-found." A hush swept over the space. Several passengers blinked, stunned by the revelation. A few pulled out their phones, others exchanged glances, suddenly aware that they weren't just witnessing an inconvenience, they were witnessing a moment. Maddie's hands trembled ever so slightly on the counter. Her mind raced to justify her actions. Maybe Ava's documents had looked off at first. Maybe she had sensed something off. Or maybe, just maybe, it had been something else. A flicker of resentment? A split-second assumption? Maddie pushed the thought down like a stone into water and told herself she was only doing her job. The security officers arrived within minutes. Two of them, one tall and stone-faced, the other younger and clearly uncertain, approached with practiced professionalism. "Good evening," said the older one, "Officer Lennox. We were called about a passenger verification?" Maddie gestured stiffly toward Ava. "Yes. I flagged this reservation for additional review. Her documents need to be verified." Ava didn't flinch. "You are welcome to inspect them. As I've said, I have nothing to hide." She handed over her driver's license, passport, and boarding pass in a deliberate, measured motion. Officer Lennox examined them silently while the younger one tapped into a portable tablet. After a minute, the young officer looked up. "Everything checks out. Confirmed seat, verified ID, elite member status." Lennox nodded in agreement and returned the documents. "Apologies for the delay, Dr. Sinclair. You're cleared to proceed." Ava took her belongings with quiet grace, But instead of walking away, she turned back to Maddie. "Next time," she said calmly, "ask yourself what it was you really doubted. Was it the barcode on the ticket, or the woman holding it?" The words landed like a gavel in the room. Maddie stood frozen, her lips parted but no words escaping. Around them, the low murmur of passengers turned into a subtle wave of indignation. Some were filming openly now. From the back of the line, a teenager wearing a backpack turned toward his mother. "She literally owns the airline?" he asked, baffled. The mother nodded. "And that woman tried to stop her from boarding her own plane. Can you believe that?" A man in business casual attire stepped out of line and approached Ava. "Excuse me, Dr. Sinclair? I'm broadcasting live for a podcast network. Would you mind saying a few words? People need to hear this." But Ava shook her head gently. "This moment doesn't need more noise. It needs reflection." She turned and walked toward the private boarding area. Every step she took felt heavier than the last, not from shame, but from the weight of countless similar moments, too many to count, that had never been recorded, never gone viral, never received an apology. Back at the counter, Maddie stood numb. The security officers were gone, the passengers were moving on, and yet she felt like the center of a collapsing stage. Her manager was approaching fast, his expression unreadable. She knew without asking that the fallout had already begun. Her phone buzzed. It was her son. "Saw a video of you at the airport." "What the hell, Mom?" Maddie locked the screen. Her stomach churned. Her manager's voice broke through the haze. "Office. Now." As they walked, she felt the burn of every stare. Her knees wobbled. She didn't know what would happen next, disciplinary action, suspension, worse. But what struck her most wasn't fear of consequences. It was the growing awareness that Ava hadn't needed to raise her voice or make a scene. She had simply told the truth. And the truth had made Maddie feel smaller than any punishment ever could. Meanwhile, Ava sat quietly in the executive lounge, her husband Raymond now seated beside her. He had rushed over from his faculty office when he saw the video spreading on social media. A friend had texted him a link. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner," he said softly. "You're here now?" Ava replied, leaning against him for a moment. Her phone pinged again. Messages were pouring in, friends, journalists, civil rights groups, even rival airlines. Everyone wanted a statement. A quote. A soundbite. Instead, Ava stared out the tall windows, watching a Solstice Air plane taxi across the tarmac. "I didn't want to become a symbol today," she murmured. Raymond nodded. "But sometimes symbols choose us." Ava didn't reply. She wasn't thinking about headlines or policies at that moment. She was thinking about every young girl who would one day walk into an airport in a suit like hers, confident, capable, and maybe, just maybe, unquestioned. That's what she would fight for next. The sun had long dipped below the horizon when Ava and Raymond finally returned to their home on the north side of the city. Their sleek, modern townhouse offered comfort and quiet, but tonight, neither could find solace in its clean lines and ambient lighting. Ava's phone buzzed like a metronome with incoming notifications, each one a digital echo of the confrontation that had unfolded just hours earlier. By the time they stepped into the kitchen, a national news network had already picked up the story. Prominent airline executive denied boarding by her own employee. The footage was looped across screens, showing Ava's poised demeanor juxtaposed with Maddie's tense insistence that security be involved. On social media, the hashtags were multiplying, #FlyWithRespect, #Sinclair deserves better, and #systemic bias in flight trending across platforms. Raymond poured her a glass of water, but Ava barely touched it. She sat at the counter, still in her work blazer, scrolling through a torrent of public opinion. "This isn't just about me anymore," she said softly. "It never was," Raymond replied. The emails from civil rights attorneys, DEI consultants, journalists, and activists piled into her inbox faster than she could delete them. One message, however, gave her pause. It was from Nora Lynn, the company's director of ethics and compliance. Nora's subject line was simple: "We need to act." "I'm with you." Ava stood suddenly and walked to her home office, flicking on the desk lamp. "We're not letting this just be a viral clip," she muttered. "I'm drafting a proposal tonight. I want real, institutional change. Not a press release. Not a hollow apology. Systems. Structure. Reform." Raymond nodded, watching her slip back into that razor-sharp focus that had helped her build an airline from nothing. "You lead," he said. "I'll help shape the legal framework." They worked side by side for hours, Ava hammering out bullet points for internal reforms, mandatory bias training, an anonymous complaint system with real consequences, internal promotion audits, and a code of conduct rewrite that explicitly addressed discrimination in subtle and overt forms. By 2 a.m., the document was 12 pages long and still growing. Across the city, in a modest one-bedroom apartment, Maddie sat alone at her dining table, wrapped in a fleece blanket. The apartment was silent save for the faint hum of the fridge and the ticking of a wall clock. On her cracked phone screen, the video played again and again, Ava calmly confronting her, passengers watching, security verifying the ticket, and finally, that look Ava gave her before walking away. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. Her teenage son, Tyler, had barely looked at her since getting home from school. He had walked past her without a word, earbuds in, backpack slung low. Only after locking himself in his room did he send a message, "How could you do that to someone like her?" Maddie had no answer. She still couldn't figure out what, exactly, had triggered her behavior at the counter. Stress? Ego? Bias she didn't want to admit lived inside her? A notification pinged on her screen. She opened it to find an email from HR, mandatory administrative leave, effective immediately. A formal hearing will be scheduled. She closed her eyes and exhaled shakily. Her job, her only real lifeline, was slipping. And worse, her son had looked at her with shame in his eyes. She knew she needed to do something she'd never done before, confront herself. The next day, Ava stepped into Eclipse's executive boardroom with a USB drive in hand. The room, usually filled with casual confidence and shareholder banter, now buzzed with uncertainty. Word had gotten out. The confrontation video had forced every leader in the room to choose, either bury the moment as a PR issue or rise to meet the reckoning. Diego Martins, the interim CEO, greeted her with a nod. "You ready?" he asked quietly. "I was born ready for this," she replied, handing him the drive. The presentation began. Ava didn't mince words. She showed the video clip, not for dramatics, but as a mirror. "This," she said, "is not just a viral embarrassment. It is a reflection of what we've ignored for too long. I want to make sure no one, no passenger, no employee, ever has to feel like they don't belong in a space they've earned." Slide after slide laid out the structural reforms. Not just reactionary measures, but preventative infrastructure, a diversity accountability office with teeth, a zero-tolerance policy with transparent enforcement, and board-level oversight tied to executive bonuses. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then, surprisingly, Norlin spoke up. "This isn't a burden," Nora said. "It's an opportunity. We talk about being a next-generation airline. Let's prove it." The proposal passed unanimously. A week later, Eclipse Air held a press conference. Ava stood at the center of the stage with Diego and Nora flanking her. Journalists packed the room, their cameras flashing. "Today," Ava began, "we commit to something greater than damage control. We commit to culture change. Not just in this airline, but, we hope, across the industry." She outlined the reforms. Her voice was firm, but her eyes burned with emotion. After the conference, a reporter pulled her aside. "Dr. Sinclair, do you forgive the employee who confronted you?" Ava paused. "This was never about personal vengeance," she said. "It's about learning. And growth. If she's willing to do the work, yes, I believe anyone can change." Back in her apartment, Maddie watched the press conference stream live. Her hands trembled slightly. She had started therapy 2 days earlier, a requirement for her return to work review, but one she accepted with humility. As the camera panned across Ava's face, Maddie felt a strange surge of gratitude. Not for being caught, but for being challenged to become better. She picked up her phone and texted Tyler. "I'm going to fix this. Not for them, for us. I promise." There was no reply, but a minute later, his door cracked open. "Dinner?" he asked, voice soft. Maddie blinked in surprise. Yeah, sure." It was a small thing, but it felt like a second chance. The Solstice Air auditorium was packed. Not with customers or travelers, but with the people who made the airline function: pilots, gate agents, engineers, attendants, and executives. All were gathered for what had been billed as a transformation assembly. The energy in the room buzzed somewhere between curiosity and skepticism. At the front of the room stood a new banner, emblazoned with the company's freshly unveiled motto, "Equity in every altitude." It was bold, ambitious, and to many, still unproven. Among those seated in the crowd was Maddie Lorne. It was her first time back in a corporate space since her administrative leave began. Though technically still under review, she'd been invited to this meeting, partly as a gesture of transparency, partly as a test. Maddie had spent the last 2 weeks in therapy, unpacking not only her actions at the gate that night but also the years of bitterness, burnout, and fear that had built up like rust on her sense of self. Her therapist, a straight-talking woman named Dr. Amina Greaves, hadn't sugarcoated anything. "You didn't make a mistake," she had said during their first session. "You made a choice. Now you get to make new ones." So Maddie was here. She sat in the very last row, her palms sweating, her heart thudding, her eyes focused on the woman about to take the stage. Dr. Ava Sinclair stepped forward, flanked by Diego Martins and the newly appointed Director of Equity and Workplace Inclusion, Marisol Vega, a position that hadn't existed a month ago. Ava adjusted the mic. The room quieted. "I'm not here to rehash what happened," she began, her voice calm but resolute. "That moment at the check-in counter was just one symptom of a larger issue. One we've all either witnessed, experienced, or ignored." There was no defensiveness in her tone, only resolve. "Let me be clear," she continued. "Accountability isn't about punishment. It's about prevention. It's about making sure that no one feels small in spaces they've worked hard to reach. It's about making equity more than a buzzword. It's a practice." She clicked to the next slide of her presentation. The reforms she had proposed, now officially company policy, were spelled out plainly. Mandatory bias and equity training for all employees, quarterly. Creation of the Inclusive Action Council, IAC, featuring cross-level staff from custodians to C-suite. Anonymous incident reporting, with third-party oversight. Public commitment to promotion audits and internal reviews on pay equity. There were nods. A few skeptical glances. But no one looked away. "In the coming weeks," Ava said, "we'll begin what we're calling the LIFT program. It's not just training, it's transformation. We'll be hiring educators, counselors, and facilitators to lead dialogue, not lectures." As she stepped back from the podium, the room remained quiet. Not out of disapproval, but out of awe. Then, someone started to clap. It was Tom Delgado, the shift lead who had spoken up during the incident, his small voice of truth still echoing in company circles. Others joined in. Soon, the auditorium was filled with applause, not the perfunctory kind, but something heavier. Something meaningful. After the meeting, Ava returned to her office where Raymond was waiting with a thermos of her favorite hibiscus tea. "You didn't just plant the seed," he said, handing her the cup. "You're tending the whole garden." She smiled, exhausted but energized. "It still doesn't feel like enough. It's not supposed to, because it's not over. But it's beginning." Just then, her phone buzzed. A text from Marisol Vega, one of the employees wants to speak at the next LIFT program session. "It's Maddie Lorne." Ava stared at the message, unsure how to feel. Compassion warred with caution. A week later, in a smaller room used for employee focus groups, Maddie stood before a semicircle of co-workers. Her hair was pinned back neatly, her posture upright, her hands shaking just a little. "I don't expect anyone to forgive me," she began. "What I did was wrong. But it didn't come out of nowhere. It came from years of letting my frustrations fester. I was overwhelmed, angry, and I took it out on someone who didn't deserve it, someone who built what I get to be part of." Some employees looked down. Others looked straight at her, arms folded. Maddie continued. "Since that night, I've been in therapy. I've had to face some really hard truths. I built walls to survive, but those walls kept me from seeing people. I don't want to be that person anymore. And I'm not asking for sympathy, I'm asking for the chance to be better." She took a breath. "I also spoke to my son. He called me out. And honestly, I needed that." When she finished, the room was quiet. Then a young flight attendant named Jules spoke up. "It's not easy to stand here and say all that. I respect that you're trying." Others nodded. Someone even clapped once, softly. Later, Ava watched the recording of the session. She didn't cry. But her eyes remained wet for a long while. 3 months passed. Solstice Air's new initiatives were already showing signs of impact. Internal complaint numbers dropped, while reported satisfaction across racial and gender lines increased. The LIFT program became a model for other companies. Media outlets ran follow-ups not just about the incident, but about the change it catalyzed. Ava was invited to speak at an international equity summit in Zurich. She accepted. Her keynote was titled, "From Silence to Systems, Leading with Accountability." Back home, Maddie's relationship with her son had started to mend. He still didn't say much, but now, he waited for her after shifts. They ate together more often. She had even started journaling, another suggestion from Dr. Greaves. One evening, after dinner, Tyler handed her his phone. On the screen was a tweet. Just heard Dr. Sinclair speak live. We need more leaders like her, and more people willing to grow like Maddie Lorne. Maddie's eyes filled with tears. Who posted this? She asked, voice trembling. I did, Tyler said. Proud of you, Mom. And Ava? She stood once more in the same check-in terminal where everything had begun. This time, not as a passenger, but as a guest of honor for Solstice Air's Employee Appreciation Day. Maddie was there too, working the event check-in booth. Their eyes met. No words were needed. But Ava offered a nod, a small gesture. A signal of acknowledgement. Not forgiveness. Not forgetfulness. But maybe. The beginning of something better. 1 year later, the grand atrium of Solstice Air's renovated headquarters buzzed with life. Where there had once been sterile decor and corporate indifference, there now stood interactive installations highlighting stories of inclusivity, employee-led murals celebrating diversity, and touchscreen kiosks detailing Solstice's social impact programs. At the far end of the atrium, under a wide banner that read Soaring Forward, 1 year of change, a polished stage had been erected. Industry leaders, media figures, activists, and airline employees from across the country filled the room for the milestone event. Standing behind the curtain, Ava Sinclair adjusted the pin on her lapel, a delicate silver feather, the new emblem of Solstice's equity initiative. It was a symbol of transformation, chosen not for how it looked, but for what it meant. She took a breath, steadied herself, and stepped onto the stage. Applause met her like a wave, earnest, resonant, and sustained. The same woman who had once been doubted in a terminal now stood as the architect of a cultural revolution within an industry long plagued by invisible barriers. Good morning, Ava began, her voice amplified but intimate. 1 year ago, I stood in front of a much smaller audience after being publicly challenged in a space I helped create. That moment could have faded into the digital noise. But we chose differently. She paused, scanning the crowd. We turned a painful truth into progress. Not just for Solstice, but for everyone who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced. She walked slowly across the stage, gesturing to a screen behind her that now displayed powerful statistics. 28% increase in executive roles held by people of color. Full implementation of Solstice's Lift program. 95% of staff reported improved workplace culture. Model adopted by 3 other major airlines. But this isn't just about numbers, Ava continued. It's about people. It's about every story, every voice that got lost before someone had the courage to listen. She paused and looked directly into the audience. And we are still listening. The audience rose in applause. Among them was Maddie Lorne, seated next to her son Tyler and director Marisol Vega. Maddie's posture had changed since last year, less guarded, more grounded. She didn't shrink in rooms like this anymore. Not because everything had been forgiven, but because she had earned her way back, with work, not words. When the applause died down, Diego Martins took the stage briefly to announce a new community fellowship in Ava's name. The Sinclair Initiative would offer leadership training to underrepresented youth pursuing careers in aviation, engineering, and public policy. The moment felt full circle. Later that afternoon, in a sunlit lounge overlooking the runways, Ava and Raymond shared a quiet toast with a few close allies, Marisol, Diego, Tom Delgado, and 2 of the Lift program facilitators. I don't think I've ever seen this company breathe so freely, Tom remarked, sipping ginger ale. It's got lungs now, Marisol added with a smile. And a heart. Ava glanced at the glass in her hand. It wasn't just about implementing change. It was about embedding it. We rewrote the flight plan, sure. But now we have to stay the course. Raymond nodded. Sustainable change isn't loud. It's consistent. Across the room, Maddie hesitated by the snack table. Her eyes flicked toward Ava, unsure whether to approach. Ava noticed and gave a subtle nod. Maddie walked over, her voice measured. I don't want to interrupt. I just wanted to say thank you. Again. Ava regarded her for a long moment, then said, How's Tyler? Maddie smiled softly. He's proud. He even used me in his senior ethics project. Called it When Growth Takes Flight. Ava's expression softened, and she extended a hand. Tell him he's already a better man than most I've met. They shook hands, firm, brief, but meaningful. Weeks passed, and Ava's influence extended beyond aviation. She was invited to advise a federal task force on corporate equity standards. She gave commencement speeches at universities. She declined book deals but approved a documentary, only after insisting it highlight other voices, not just her own. On a rainy Thursday morning, Ava boarded a flight to Geneva for a global leadership summit. As she settled into her seat, business class, aisle, she noticed a young woman across the row nervously juggling a laptop, notepad, and boarding pass. "First time flying international?" Ava asked, a friendly lilt in her tone. The young woman nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Going to present a proposal on gender parity in tech. I'm a little overwhelmed." Ava smiled warmly. "Then you're exactly where you belong." The young woman blinked. "Wait. Are you Dr. Ava Sinclair?" Gently, Ava offered her hand. "I am. And something tells me I'll be hearing your name soon, too." As the plane climbed through layers of cloud, Ava gazed out the window. The sky, as always, was vast, open, unjudging. She thought of Professor Elias Monroe. Of the girl she used to be. Of every person whose path had been blocked by prejudice, every dream postponed by someone else's assumptions. And she thought of what it meant to not only break the ceiling, but to invite others to rise through it. That evening, back in the States, Tyler stood beside his mom at a local community center. Maddie had just given a short talk to other airline employees about confronting bias and rebuilding trust. He handed her a water bottle. "You know," he said, "you were always strong. But now you're kind of wise too." She laughed, tears springing to her eyes. "I had a good reason to change." As they stepped outside, the air felt lighter. Not perfect, but possible. Epilogue. Ava's story is now taught in leadership seminars. Not as a story of victimhood, but as a blueprint for change. Solstice Air's reforms ripple into other industries, proving that companies can change if people inside them are willing to speak up, listen deeply, and act boldly. From the depths of discrimination, Ava built a legacy not of blame, but of balance, justice, and vision. Her story reminds us that sometimes, the most powerful takeoff doesn't happen in the air. It happens when we decide we're no longer willing to be grounded by silence. And in that decision, change truly takes flight.